Well, the media's focus on the liberalisation of drug laws continued this week, following on from Radio New Zealand's documentary by Guyon Espiner called Wasted last week, which was also shown on TVNZ. This week it was Patrick Gower on Newshub. And sadly, again, rather than a balanced and robust debate, what we watched were, in my view, weak arguments, misleading statements and flawed conclusions. Take note, this is the war, but it's the war for drugs. So this documentary was funded by you via New Zealand On Air. And just like Guyon Espiner's documentary last week, it was based on the spurious notion of the war on drugs has failed. But as I highlighted in our analysis of Guyon's one, there was simply an acknowledgement by leaders at the time in the 70s that drug abuse is a public enemy and it needs to be dealt with. Time magazine admitted that the war on drugs phrase was invented by the media. So Patrick Gower's documentary was 44 minutes, and within the first couple of minutes, we're back with the pro-drug Drug Foundation, just like Guyon Espiner's documentary. I actually wonder whether the Drug Foundation paid for these productions. And this was about promoting not avoiding drugs or stopping drug abuse. No, it was actually about empowering usage by getting the drugs tested.
It's Friday night, and this group, except me, are using the party drug MDMA. This is happening all over the country. These people are breaking the law. MDMA, also known as ecstasy, can be taken as a pill or snorted. It's a Class B drug. Being caught with small amounts can mean a criminal conviction and up to 3 months in prison. But in a weird contradiction, a law change this year made checking illegal drugs like MDMA completely legal if you're licensed.
What have you got for us to test today, or what do you think you have?
I believe I have MDMA.
And have you taken any of this one before?
Possibly, like from the same person.
Yeah, now, as I said last time we talked about this, drug testing is like playing Russian roulette. It doesn't guarantee that the drug being taken won't cause physical or mental harm or death to the individual consumer because people react differently to drugs. It can't test for how many pills the person consumes. There's been recent examples where drugs have caused significant harm, and these drugs would have been given the green light by drug testing anyway. The real problem is that drug testing is seen by many younger people, especially as a clear endorsement of drug use, and it sends a message that illicit drugs are acceptable and can be safe. It's well-intentioned, but it's simply another ill-informed decision to consume illicit drugs. Now, I also just wanted to check the claim that MDMA or ecstasy use is happening all over the country every Friday night. Now, according to the latest Ministry of Health survey, just over 4%, just 4% have used MDMA sometime in the past 12 months. 4%. The good news is that the rate has decreased in the past 12 months, and much of this usage will be the one-off scenarios at music festivals where it almost seems to be a prerequisite to be consuming drugs. And this is usage, this 4% is usage which includes a person who may have used it only once in the whole year. Now you may be asking, what about other drugs? Well, cocaine usage is just 1.1 usage sometime in the year, and meth or P is just 1.3%. So maybe, just maybe, the law is working. But both Patrick and Guyon Espiner don't discuss this issue. It's about the right to use drugs. By the way, cannabis use in the past 12 months is just over 14%. But hey, just because a drug is preferred doesn't mean the law should change. Do we change ram raid laws because they're so popular at the moment? Do we increase the speed limit because, hey, everybody's flouting the new lower speed limit? Of course not. It's hopefully based on public health and safety. Now, Patrick Gower then speaks to a couple of dealers. Ironically, the drug dealers are concerned about bad stuff, bad drugs, dodgy drugs. They'd prefer just to sell the real stuff. And there's right concern about fentanyl, just another drug to add to the dangers. It's similar to morphine, but it's 50 to 100 times more potent. And fentanyl, which is illegal, and nobody seems to be challenging that, by the way, it's made in labs and it's sold illegally as a powder dropped onto blotter paper, put in eye drops and nasal sprays, eyedroppers, or made into pills that look like prescription opioids. And some drug dealers are mixing fentanyl with other drugs such as heroin, cocaine, meth, and MDMA, and that's because it takes very little to produce a high with fentanyl, making it a cheaper option. But apparently, ethical drug dealers just want you to have the pure MDMA. And the one positive of this doco is that they actually spell out the realities of the harms, although just briefly.
Hayden considers himself an ethical drug dealer, chemically testing the drugs he sells.
Boom.
That's looking beautiful.
So this is MDMA.
Sure is.
There are risks with taking MDMA, especially if you take too much, a racing heart and potentially even seizures or cardiac arrest. It can be addictive and have detrimental long-term effects, including memory loss.
Okay, so now just like Guyon Espiner, Patrick Gower pops over to the only state in Australia who has liberalised drug laws, the ACT, which is where Canberra is. And the ACT decriminalised cannabis 2 years ago, 2020, and they've just decriminalised the possession of illicit drugs, including heroin, cocaine, MDMA, and meth, small amounts of possession. And apparently it's working perfectly, even though it's only just happened. Now, before Patrick promotes ACT's liberalisation, he speaks to a politician who speaks the truth, the one opponent in this whole 44-minute documentary. But incredibly, as you watch this clip, you'll see Patrick links and blames Australia's strict drug approach with the issue of 501s coming to New Zealand. Two very different issues. If anything, it points out that we are soft on drugs and on drug crime.
I've gone to Australia to see if they might have some answers.
I have a zero tolerance approach to drugs. I don't think that they're acceptable in any shape or form.
You want Australia to stay at war with drugs?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no way that we should be backing off on the drug war that is currently underway now.
Karen Andrews, now in opposition, was the top Minister for Law and Order for the Conservative Morrison government. Under her watch, police mounted Operation Ironside.
The most significant operation in policing history here in Australia.
It was a massive blow to drug distribution and organised crime. Andrews also oversaw the 501 policy.
Under the coalition government, nearly 10,000 non-citizens have had their visas cancelled or refused on character grounds.
Okay, I'm not quite sure of that link, but Patrick then brings in an international expert who tries to argue that using MDMA or ecstasy is safer than riding a horse. And in 2009, this expert, Professor David Nutt, was slammed for suggesting that taking ecstasy was no worse than riding a horse. He was the government's drug advisor. And the Home Secretary accused Professor Nutt of trivialising the danger of drugs and showing insensitivity to the families of victims of ecstasy. Yep, victims of ecstasy. You won't hear that phrase in these documentaries, victims of drugs. And the UK government said that Nutt's comments sent the wrong message to young people about the danger of drugs, and he was subsequently sacked. He also argued that ecstasy and LSD were less dangerous than alcohol. Oh, by the way, he was the guest of the Drug Foundation back in 2013. No surprises, eh? But Professor Nutt was Patrick Gower's expert of choice.
Well, horse riding is more dangerous than taking MDMA, that's unquestionable, particularly if your horse riding involves jumping over things. And people doing eventing, there's a serious injury every 35 hours, whereas with MDMA there's a serious injury about every 100,000 hours of use. So overall, MDMA is less harmful than horse riding.
Oh, okay. Maybe MDMA is less dangerous than flying in planes as well. I don't know. But apparently it's religion's fault for protecting health and protecting communities from drug harm.
Laws, since the beginning of time, have been driven by political or religious beliefs rather than inheritance of harm.
Dave
Yeah, apparently. Well, then it's back to dealer Joseph. And here's the interesting bit. He's facing 6 years in prison as a significant dealer, and the law has caught up with him finally.
In 2020, New Zealand police carried out a massive drug bust across the country. Joseph was one of its targets. He escaped arrest and went on the run for 2 months before the cops hunted him down.
They asked me to get out of the car and they've got AR-15s pointed at me and a ghetto bird above me, and they're asking me to get on my hands and knees with my hands above my head, and I freaked out. That was the day that my world came crashing down on me.
Joseph is facing 6 years in prison for his role as a mid-level dealer. 36 people were arrested in Operation Cincinnati and $10 million worth of assets were seized. But it has not stopped the flow of drugs.
They got rid of a pill press and they put a stop to copious amounts of ecstasy pills being produced here in Auckland. Put a dent in the weed trade, the coke trade, all of that.
But did they stop it?
Of course not. Of course not. They hardly even applied the brakes. There is no war on drugs. If there was, drugs have won.
So let me get this straight. Apparently, if we tackle drug crime, unless it's totally stopped when we arrest someone, it's failed. I mean, that's a silly argument, isn't it? We've arrested ram raiders, we've arrested fleeing drivers, we're arresting burglars, family violence offenders, child abusers. Has it stopped? Well, no. Should we stop enforcing the law? Of course not. And I'm not quite sure the line, "there is no war on drugs," that we just heard was supposed to be included. But later in the documentary, we find the usual story of drug use from Joseph. Drug harm and drug abuse starts with cannabis. And it's a tragic story, but as you watch this clip, note the role of the law in coercing the treatment. The best solution to quitting drugs and escaping its addiction and harms. Getting healing from the pain which is masked by drug use.
First experience with drugs?
12 years old. My cousin handed me a little cone of marijuana on a can. We hotboxed the tent and I was stoned off my tits.
That's the start of your life of drugs?
Yeah.
At age 13, he was expelled from high school after he was caught smoking synthetic cannabis.
I started getting into petty crime, was a real handful for my mother. She was deemed unsuitable to look after me and I was deemed too naughty, so I was placed into SIFS care.
At what age?
14.
And where was your old man?
He passed away when I was 3 from a heroin overdose.
From age 14 on, Joseph started experimenting with all drugs, from MDMA to meth to cocaine.
How much MDMA have you done?
Oh, mate. I mean, I couldn't even begin to estimate it.
Coke, I mean, how much coke you snorted?
Copious amounts of cocaine to the point where the flesh in between my 2 nostrils was almost deteriorating. It's not anything I'm proud of. I've used drugs to deal with pain, to deal with hurt.
Joseph is 25 and spent the last 8 months in rehab at Odyssey House, preparing to face court for sentencing. Now living at home, he has a call with a counsellor once a week.
About your goals and stuff, and you mentioned one of your goals after leaving Odyssey was to find a job?
Yes.
Joseph has been to jail before. His longest stint was 5 months. Getting clean should help him with the sentencing.
But I just...
Yeah, he's turning his life around. How did he do that? Well, it was because of the law that he ended up facing consequences, and which mandated treatment as a road to reducing his sentence. If it wasn't illegal, he would never have been apprehended. He would never have ended up at this point. He would never have been coerced to get the treatment and be set free. I actually thought this was the high of the documentary. But it's the coercion of the law which brings that about. We need rehab. We need mental health and addiction services, more Odyssey houses and Salvation Army drug treatment centres. But we also need the law to mandate that treatment. New Zealand has already proved that suggesting treatment doesn't work with most users. When will they understand that? Now, Patrick focused on how good the ACT laws are. And this is where the state where Canberra is. The local police chief says it's the best option to decriminalise all drugs. But here's the viewpoint that Patrick didn't refer you to. And this is from 2 years ago. And this article says, Australian Federal Police Commissioner Reece Kershaw stated earlier this year that decriminalising drugs would make it more dangerous for society and for police. Similarly, the Australian Federal Police Association is concerned the new possession limits would provide an instant defence for criminals while they believe the ACT government has not invested enough in health and rehabilitation to decriminalise the drugs in question. Both the AFP and the AFPA predict road carnage as more people using meth drive on Canberra's streets. So that's what the police said. The Law Society argued that the bill would have a minimal effect on diverting drug users from the criminal justice system. It is relatively uncommon for drug users to come before the courts charged with only drug possession. Their submission to the government inquiry stated, possession of a drug of dependence is typically charged alongside other criminal offences such as burglary, assault, or drug driving. Mr. Hanson was also concerned decriminalising drugs would overcrowd already broken drug treatment services which were overcrowded or had long waiting lists. Yep, you didn't hear that side in the documentary. Now, Patrick Gower also extolled the virtues of Portugal, and what you didn't hear was this. From 2019, deaths from overdose in Portugal increased by almost 30%, and reached their highest figure in the last 5 years. You also didn't hear this. Hospitalisations for psychotic breakdown or schizophrenia in patients with registered cannabis use have increased almost 30-fold over the course of 15 years in Portugal. Look, I'm happy to debate Portugal, but read this independent report by a Swiss think tank before you listen to drug advocates about how good Portugal is. But we didn't get both sides of the debate in this documentary. And just finally, the documentary focused on magic mushroom, hallucinogenic mushrooms, psychedelic medicines, including LSD. There's a push that they have medicinal value. And the documentary takes it as, well, they work, anecdotal evidence, some interviewees. But the FDA in the US has not agreed with this. There is research. Good. Let the research happen. Apparently there's some going on locally at Auckland University. But don't make claims, just like with medicinal marijuana, without conclusive, independent, credible research showing that it's safe and effective. Even the researchers admitted that it's anecdotal evidence. But that's not how research and science and medicines work. So overall, sadly, Patrick Gower's documentary was no different to Guyon Espiner's. It was a wasted opportunity to hear both sides, to test the arguments against the counter-argument. But here's the bit that I found really, really ironic. On the same night as this documentary was being broadcast, our politicians were passing the second reading of the Smoke-Free Environments and Regulated Products Smoke Tobacco Amendment Bill, the anti-smoking law, which has a steadily rising purchasing age so that teenagers will never be able to legally purchase cigarettes, dramatically reduce the nicotine in cigarettes, and force them only to be sold throughout specialty tobacco stores rather than corner stores and supermarkets. Is this a war on ciggies? A war on tobacco? If so, great. Call it what you want. It's not about a war on cigarettes or on drugs. We don't need an army, machine guns, informants, patrols. Just like cigarettes, we need a stay drug-free message. It's about enforcing drug laws to protect families, protect communities, protect health. We should continue fighting drugs and the devastation its use causes on both the users, their families, and society in general. Sadly, both Patrick Gower and Guyon Espiner have failed to debate this important social issue. They've merely pushed their own narrative. I think we deserve more respect in these debates.